Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Tony, I think it's safe to come out now. I think the transfer portal is mostly to almost certainly over at this point. Is it safe? Like, I feel like I grew up on the East Coast and we would have hurricanes and you'd get like the eye of the hurricane where it's like everything calms down and it's this like, it's like, oh, we can go outside. The storm's over. It's like, no, not so fast, my friend. Like, I know the portal's closed, but I keep seeing the warnings about, well, because of the holiday, it could be another couple days of paperwork. Are we sure it's safe to come out and talk about the transfer portal?
Boy, now you've done it, Tom. I hadn't thought about that. We are talking about Ohio State's biggest loss, who we think the biggest loss is in the portal. And I don't know whether this is, are we tempting something here? Are we possibly pushing somebody else into the portal? Like, as soon as I set this to publish and it's out there, does, like, I don't even want to say a name, go into the portal, and so let's not even let's not even give it a second thought. Let's not even try to say that this is a possibility that could happen. Let's stick with what we know right now, which is generally what we do, and it's generally enough. Sometimes it's enough. So let's talk about Ohio State's biggest loss. Who we think the biggest loss is. Like, if there is a guy that you could pull back from the portal, who would it be? And I've got a name that I'm not going to go first. I've got a name that is, I believe, the correct name, but also the incorrect name. And that's just, Tom, that's what we call a tease. I'll let you go first, and you probably just steal both of my answers and then go from there.
Yeah, so I guess let's define our terms here. Are we including where this person landed in the calculus here? Where
I have to, right?
So someone who where they officially landed, I think that you kind of have to factor that in because I don't think there was anyone that they lost who was clear cut 100% definitely going to be a starter for the 2026 Ohio State Buckeyes. And I think they were a net winner in the transfer portal, at least, with what we know so far. And if something else changes, rest assured, it's Tony's fault. I can say that because he's the one who made me do this show. So this is on him if anything else changes. But I'm just kind of scrolling through this list again. And, I think I could make an argument for a whole bunch of guys. If you're going to look at someone who could come back to bite them this upcoming season, at least during the regular season, I think you're starting with Aaron Scott, who, because he's at Oregon. I don't know that he's a starter, and he's not the person who, if I take everything else and I just look at in terms of guy who's missing from this year's roster, who they haven't solved for this problem yet, he's not the guy I'm picking. In terms of the guy who could really come back to bite them in terms of being on a team that they play, I guess he would be the guy. But, you mentioned a name beforehand, and I don't want to steal that name just in case that is the person you're going to go with. So I will take, I'll take the answer that I'm sure lots of people are screaming about, which is Quincy Porter, where I think he's someone who he's going to Notre Dame, which is obviously a team they could very easily end up seeing on the in the college football playoff this upcoming season. And he's someone who has 2 more years of eligibility left. So it's not just this is going to be a 1 year thing. And you'll have to make up for that for the 1 year. He was certainly someone who was a sort of next man up ish. I mean, we certainly had this conversation around him when he went into the portal, where you've got Jeremiah Smith, you've got Chris Henry Jr. These are 2 guys who are very talented, who are going to be just, they will be just fine at the X position. In terms of the most talented player that they lost, I think there's an argument for him. It's someone you could end up playing in the college football playoff. So I'll say him, but I will say him with the fact that you're going to say one of probably 3 or 4 other names. And I'll go, yeah, I could make a pretty good argument for him too.
Well, like, if you look at the guys that left, who do you envision having the best career?
I think Quincy Porter is a pretty good answer for that. And I could make an argument for a couple other guys. One is headed down to play for Lane Kiffin. I could make a pretty good argument for him. I could make a decent argument potentially for another guy who's going to go play wide receiver at Notre Dame. But, I don't know that I have anyone on there who I think future Heisman Trophy winner, future, top 5 NFL draft pick necessarily, but you've got a handful of guys there that I think that's someone who could go on to have a pretty good career, and he's one of them.
Yeah, I'll get back to him in a sec, but I think you look at James Peoples. They had to replace him with Jacoby Jackson. Is that an upgrade? We'll see. I think Penn State's pretty happy with what they got. You alluded to Fahim Delane, who certainly I go back. I keep saying that it was Fahim Delane and Quincy Porter leaving that really upset Ohio State fans and convinced them that things are like the transfer portal has been disastrous. It was those two guys that that broke the camel's back, if you will. And Fahim Delane, sure, you'd love to have him. Would you rather have him or Terry Moore? Like, right, I don't think that's not a question, right? You want the guy with experience. And granted, Fahim Delane played more than Terry Moore did last year, but that was because of an ACL. But this is a guy with experience who has done it. And so I think, I don't think it's Delane. I think the answer here, Tom, is Quincy Porter. However, the thing is, he's playing behind. Like, he plays the same position as Jeremiah Smith, and he plays the same position as Chris Henry Jr. So you have Jeremiah Smith. The reason you can't have Quincy Porter is because you have Jeremiah Smith. So are you trading that out? Is anybody trading that out right now? Some people will, sure, for 2 more years of Quincy Porter as opposed to 1 year of Jeremiah Smith. That's just how some people are. But you also can't have Quincy Porter because you have Chris Henry Jr. So, like, these two guys have canceled out Quincy Porter. So, and that way, he's not a loss at all. You will never notice that loss because they all play the same position. Now, do they all have to be, does that mean they can't all be on the field at one time? No, it doesn't mean that. But it just means that that's the type of receiver that you would expect him to be. And sure, you can move Jeremiah Smith around. You can move all of these players around. But he is an ex-receiver. He is your ex-receiver. The problem is they don't need him right now. And he wants to go be the number 1. Go do that. It's not available for you at Ohio State right now. The number 1 receiver is already spoken for. And so I feel like he's got the highest ceiling of the players that I saw leave the portal, right? And yet the problem is Ohio State already has a high ceiling at that position. So then he can't be the biggest loss if you feel pretty good about that spot. Do you want him to go to Notre Dame and go do something? No, not really. But yeah, that's why it's like I wanted to talk about this because, for one, it was a listener question. We put out a request for some listener questions, and we're going to attack them, here, one by one or so. And I'm just looking to see if this actually was one or if this was. Oh, yeah, this is from @JC Kroninger. What was the biggest get and what was the largest loss? And so today we're talking about the largest loss. And this is a lot of me saying it's Quincy Porter, but also me saying it can't possibly be Quincy Porter because of what else they have. Now, the thing is, like, I'm not completely sold on Chris Henry Jr. yet, but the thing is, I am completely sold on Jeremiah Smith. And yet I feel like Quincy Porter as a junior at Ohio State next year would have been fantastic. As a sophomore this coming season would have been really, really good, and there would have been a spot for him. But his money is spoken for. I guess is the other thing to say, like, is it a big loss? Sure. But how much money do you want tied up at the wide receiver position? This is the problem we see in all of our videos that we do. And we talk about another, two wide receivers committed out of the portal. And people are like, why do they keep getting these wide receivers? Why can't they get a lineman? Why can't they do this or they can't do that? How much money do you want spent on the receiver position?
Yeah, and this is a little bit, it's not exactly, but I kind of look at this like the trade deadline in baseball where, you're dealing from strength to a certain degree where instead of prospects, it's really NIL money and snaps and all of that. As a baseball team, if you have a ton of pitching, you can trade a pitching prospect away to get something else that you need. And, that guy might go on to do great stuff. Like sometimes you trade John Smoltz for Doyle Alexander, and John Smoltz ended up going on to do what John Smoltz did. And sometimes you trade Jeff Bagwell for Larry Anderson, and Jeff Bagwell goes on and to do what Jeff Bagwell did. But, you're kind of dealing from strength here where you can't spend a huge proportion of your cap on 3X receivers. And they're not going to get rid of Jeremiah Smith. They're going to do everything they can to make sure Jeremiah Smith stays at Ohio State. And they very clearly, when Brian Hartline announced that he was taking the USF job, the keeping Chris Henry Jr. and Jaquaden Guilford became a very, very high priority for them. And they recognize, it is not a surprise that Ohio State has a finite amount of NIL money. This is, it's a pretty decent size amount of money, but it is a finite amount of money. And so you have to make difficult choices sometimes. And by not having Quincy Porter or Mylan Graham come back, and, I think they would have liked to have both of those guys come back, but ultimately you get to a point where, okay, you have to spend money on some other stuff, and you have to, you can't guarantee these guys starting jobs and all that kind of stuff. So, okay, you have to make some difficult decisions. So yeah, I think Quincy Porter might be the guy who goes on to have the best career at his next stop. Entirely possible. I think it's all projection at this point because he had that injury and missed so much time this year that we don't really know. And I think there's a whole fascinating alternate history where he does play and you do know. And how does that change what the priority is? If you had seen it on the field and he had 5 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown in the Big Ten championship game against Indiana, guess what? They're probably keeping him, but that didn't happen. So you don't know. So, I think if I was going to rank who has the best career at his next spot, he might be the best answer, but we could go through and do this whole exercise. I'm not saying we have to. I'm saying we could go through and do this whole exercise as who will they miss the most in 2026, or who will they miss the most in 2027? Who will they miss the most? Who will they have the hardest time replacing? I mean, who will they regret seeing on the other side of the ball from them the most? Like you could kind of do this in any number of different ways and land on a bunch of different answers.
And we will. I don't even know that there's some different names to this, and I don't know that you can't answer it definitively just yet. And I think Mylan Graham, would love to see him back at Ohio State to see what he could do. But you lose him and his 6 career receptions, and you replace him with 2 guys, in Kyle Parker and Devin McEwen, who have, 100, 200 career catches between them, most of those being McEwen. So, they've been able to overcome the losses, at least statistically and through experience. But we'll see eventually who the biggest loss is. Go ahead and share your thoughts who the biggest loss in the portal is. Shoot, it might end up being one of the defensive linemen that gone under the radar.
I'm going to say the name Jarquez Carter out loud, just so we've said the name Jarquez Carter out loud on this show, because, when could it possibly come back to haunt Ohio State that a potentially talented young defensive lineman has gone to play for the Miami Hurricanes? When would such a thing possibly come up? So there we go. We've said the name Jarquez Carter there.
Exactly. And just trying to cover some of the bases. But go ahead and throw your thoughts in the comments as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the thumbs up if you've not yet done so. And you can continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com, talking about the losses, the gains, everything in between. That will do it from here. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you all later.